Hello, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Valkyrie Holmes, and this video is all about being spontaneous, or more so, the art of going with the flow. And no, this is not your average progressive commercial. Clinical psychologist Leon Seltzer defines spontaneous behavior as behavior that is performed without any planning prior. We most commonly refer to spontaneous behavior as being reckless and unplanned, with no clear intentions other than to do something different. Like if you decide to take a last-minute trip to Bali and meet this guy on the beach and spend a night with him, and then you wake up the next morning with no will to live and a child on the way. Spontaneous, woo! But I wanted to talk a little bit about the good and bad sides of spontaneity and how you can optimize using spontaneity in your life, because I really think that we need to learn to let go and live a little bit. But to what extent? Where do we draw the line between being spontaneous and being self-destructive? When do we ask ourselves if flexibility is just us sacrificing the comfort of routine? Is being spontaneous even our choice to begin with? All good questions that we'll tackle one at a time. So sit back, relax. Never mind. No, that's not what we're doing. We're going on a walk. Strap in, put on your running shoes, walking shoes, whatever, be spontaneous, and walk with me. We're going to take a little stroll down memory lane. When I was in middle school and for the first few years of high school, I would go out every single weekend. Didn't matter who it was with, it didn't matter what we were doing, just mattered that I was going out and doing something that I could talk about when Monday rolled around. I was hyper-fixated on this idea of being constantly busy, and even though I was going out all the time and doing stuff that made me feel somewhat happy, I wasn't really doing it all for myself. I was being spontaneous for the benefit of other people, but never prioritizing how I actually felt. In reality, no one gave two shits about what I was doing or who I was with, and I wouldn't realize that at the time, but it was mostly because it wasn't me, and it didn't define who I was. But that's gonna be for another video. I would jump at any opportunity to make my life seem more interesting, but that only made me more miserable. I always assumed that being spontaneous was a good thing, and that it always led to new and better experiences. But let's hop into a bit about spontaneity in a negative light. In the article entitled "The Psychology of Spontaneity: Why Some People Drop Everything and Go," Dan Scotty indicates that comfort zones encourage you to fall victim to habits, good or bad, but ultimately argues that spontaneity as a whole isn't optimal. He says that good habits may lead to a comfort zone that's limiting and not necessarily detrimental, meaning that you could become content with the place you end up in and never grow. On the other side, he says that bad habits could be destructive in the long run, also a place where growth doesn't naturally happen. So on both ends of the spectrum, we're having about the same issues. Katie Bishop, a journalist for the New York Times, wrote an article outlining the limited willpower argument that I'd like to share with you all. It's this idea that we have a limited amount of attention that we can devote to certain tasks. Throughout our day, we spend energy making decisions that determine our outcomes, but once it gets to a later point in the day, we have less energy to devote to thinking about certain situations. While having a routine in everyday life is seen as quite the opposite of being spontaneous, it ultimately helps us spend less of our brain power thinking about it every day. Automating tasks helps replenish our willpower to some extent. There's also this idea of deciding ahead of time how to react to certain situations. This reduces the energy input of the desired outcome and lessens the mental stress that comes with quick decisions and this whole go, go, go mentality. Think about this. Have you ever thought about an event or a certain group of friends that you can't wait to hang out with, or have this anticipation building up? It's been a few weeks since you've seen that boy or girl, and you're so excited to go on this date with them, and you just have that built up excitement. That tension of knowing what's going to happen and knowing that you have plans is rewarding for a lot of people. That heads up on certain events could prevent some from overthinking the situation and being overwhelmed, which a lot of people prefer. So as of right now, we have that spontaneity is bad for your mental health, it stresses us out, and it overwhelms a large majority of people. So why is society obsessed with this idea of being spontaneous in the first place? Why was little old me so focused on showing the world my wild side? Let's first break down what being spontaneous actually means. Picture a spontaneous person, and what do you see? That person is all over the place, but still somehow has their life together. They're always up for everything, they're never the downer. Romanticize this image. A research paper at the University of Hong Kong analyzed this aesthetic of spontaneity and found that this trait is actually more appealing because these actions go hand in hand with relaxing or living longer. It brings people more joy to think about doing anything and everything than just sticking to the same old routine. There's no real consensus on what spontaneity actually is. In modern Western civilizations, it means to act entirely from natural impulse, and goes along with this idea of being completely free. In a more philosophical sense, it's to take action voluntarily with no constraints, not necessarily paired with freedom. Thomas Hobbes says, quote, "Spontaneous actions are actions not motivated by fear. So maybe that's why it's so attractive. Who wants to be scared? We'd all like to have no fear and just do what we want to do without having any fear of any consequences or what happens next. And that's why we love this idea of being spontaneous." Immanuel Kant has a quote, "Spontaneity is the ability to think and act in a world independently of the determinations of desire." This is a bit different from Hobbes' definition, but it still goes along the same lines of you think what you want and you do what you want regardless of what the world deems appropriate or normal. Another thing Kant brings up with regards to Confucian ethics is the fact that reason is not nature. We are the only beings that can reason with each other, but that doesn't mean that it's inherently natural, making it all the more attractive to us. It's new to us when common reason is used, let alone when it's changed or altered in a way that makes it more interesting. We've all grown up reasoning with each other to learn, so it might seem silly to think that something like this could be attractive in that sense, but when you think about it, humans as a species have only been around for about 300,000 years, which in comparison to the billions of years that Earth has existed, it's a very small amount of time. Reason is something unique to us, which is why any change to this common theme is something that people are intrigued by or interested in. It only begins to turn nasty when spontaneity turns to be self-destructive. I know some people who rely on being spontaneous for their happiness or need to put themselves in increasingly more dangerous positions to feel any sort of creativity. Henry Friedrich Emil, a Swiss philosopher, describes this kind of work in 3 words: analysis kills spontaneity. This is the idea that if you let yourself follow any path completely, don't trust your instincts, overthink a situation, nothing spontaneous will follow. So many choose not to overthink and trade it instead for this constant flow of new experiences that they would mistake for happiness. He also argues that you can't plan for happiness, nor can you manipulate the flows that it comes in. Because your happiness won't hinge on the same routines, his argument is that being spontaneous trains you to become better equipped to deal with different situations. But where Emil argues that spontaneity is a good thing, I would like to play devil's advocate for a second. His whole thing is that spontaneity is where creativity and happiness lie. But it's also, on the flip side, society is telling us that if you're not some of these things, then you're lonely, boring, less than. People who thrive in routine like the fact that there's no wondering what the next thing is going to be, bringing them order in a chaotic world. There shouldn't be so much emphasis on one or the other, because at opposite ends of the spectrum, they can both be a little bit destructive. This question of whether or not spontaneity can be controlled or not. You could argue that because we live in a society that is so interconnected and ideas are ingrained in our heads since birth, we don't have a choice but to think that being spontaneous is a good thing, and that's what we should aspire to be more of. You wonder why Instagram models traveling the world and travel vloggers do well on the internet? That's spontaneity. But over the course of researching this video, I found a few unique articles that help illustrate a little bit of the biological sense of spontaneity in the human species. A study done at the Center for Philosophy of Sciences at the University of Lisbon concluded that spontaneous actions are actually detected milliseconds before a subject's conscious mind can comprehend said action. What the hell does this mean? In the study, they instructed patients to flex their wrist any time while looking at a clock. After the trial, they had to describe the time they became consciously aware of their intention to flick their wrist. They found that when the patient told them a certain time, their brain signals indicated that the action of flicking their wrist happened before, meaning their body moved before their mind was aware of it. This communicates this idea of motor skills over conscious thought. Another study done on rats by the same team tested when neurons in the secondary motor cortex fired during certain tasks. Rats would spontaneously decide when to abort waiting during a task, and authors recorded neurons previously shown to be associated with spontaneity. They found that predictive signals weren't unconscious decisions, meaning there was a part of their brain that was ready before the rat fully registered that it would give up. Basically, the brain gave up the task before the rat fully registered that it would give up. While these studies only showed spontaneity in a physical sense, I think it gives a pretty good argument as to whether or not we can actually be in control of our spontaneity or not. If we don't have much control over the fact, why obsess over spontaneity that much? Why fixate on something that we don't actually have the power to change? What I practice now is not so much being spontaneous, but it's more so being flexible, and yes, there is a difference. Spontaneity relies on you, Any active of spontaneous matter is self-generated, while being flexible is more bending to different factors. For example, if I decided to plan a trip to Miami on a Sunday night and leave on a Monday, that would be spontaneous. I'm completely acting out of my own right mind to book a flight and spend a week somewhere else just because I wanted to. That's spontaneous. On the flip side, if I was planning a weekend with my friends and halfway through we decided to spend the night at a cabin in the woods because some of my friends wanted to, completely changing the course of our time together, that would be more flexible. They both seem pretty similar, but at the core, the difference between Miami and the cabin is that the decision to take a trip across the country was entirely my own, whereas with the cabin, I bent to external factors to help other people feel more comfortable, which is what I really like to do. I twisted my schedule to fit what other people wanted to do. That's flexible. I honestly like being flexible just as much as being spontaneous. But the only difference is the things I do daily are much different. When I say I'm spontaneous, it's more so that, oh, I decided to reach out to some guy and we got a call together, or, oh, let's spend a few weeks on this one random project and see how it turns out. It's not so much going out places and looking for validation in other people. I'm way more flexible when it comes to that kind of thing, when it comes to the plans I make outside of work, because I want everyone to have a good time, and that's just my way of bending to different situations and making it easier for everyone to get along with each other. But as Samya Kalia says, freedom is not a polar opposite to routine. I still get up every morning with the same routine, work in the same kind of style that gets me results, and go to bed with the same exact night routine every single day. I don't feel less spontaneous when I have a good routine, and in fact, it makes me feel more spontaneous when I do something out of the ordinary, which I think is a good thing. That kind of spice of life is what keeps it interesting. You know, we're taught that spontaneous events are the epitome of fun, but really, it changes from person to person, and there shouldn't be so much emphasis on one or the other. Be spontaneous when you want to be spontaneous. It will probably help you in the long run and help you experience new things. But also, be routine when you want to be routine. That consistency is going to get you results a lot faster than if you're bouncing around all over the place all the time. There's a clever balance that you can juggle between the two, and it takes a little while to find it, but once you do, it's a really, really amazing thing. Depending on when you're comfortable, you can choose to go all out one day and not at all the next. That's where flexibility comes in, and you get to test out what your limits are. Thank you all so much for watching. I had so much fun researching this and filming this. It's my first video that I'm filming on this channel. I wanted to talk a little bit about it for a while now. I've been traveling a lot, and it means the world to me that I finally got this done and pushing it out to people, and I hope you enjoyed. And if you have any other comments or concerns or anything like that, feel free to leave me a comment down below. Just thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you like what you see, and with that being said, this is me signing off. I will see you later.